Hey guys, it's me. I think you are going to find this video quite informative and very much interesting. There's quite a lot of parallels, or rather commonalities or similarities between our political landscape and the landscape of the politics in America. It's as though our guys have literally copied verbatim everything the Democrats are doing in America, from race hustling to propaganda to the money that they give as grants to the poor, so as for them to keep votes and to amass power through these votes over a process of time. It's rather remarkable. Listen to this, and I hope you will enjoy it. There will be part two at a future time, but I hope you will enjoy this one. It's a doozy. Listen to it.
Realistic about my opportunity to become president. I think that it's a long shot, but I'm running for the issues I mentioned, to talk about homelessness and fatherlessness, rather, and the lie that America's systemically racist, that's getting people killed. And I don't think our side, by the way, effectively deals with that well enough. It's not just driving nonsense like reparations. I mentioned that, which I consider to be the extraction of money from people who were never slave owners to be given to people who were never slaves. It's driving stuff like race-based preferences and DEI. It's getting people killed. It's called the Ferguson effect or the George Floyd effect, and that's a phenomenon of cops pulling back all over America for fear of being accused of systemic racism. As a result, in city after city after city, there are lots of people who are dead who otherwise wouldn't be dead if the police were doing their normal proactive policing. And I don't think that our side, meaning Republican side, is calling enough attention to the damage done by this lie. Look at the George Floyd riots or the Black Lives Matter riots that took place in protests in May of 2020 that lasted 4 months. The most deadly protest in the history of America. 35 people killed, 2,000 police officers injured, about $2 billion in property damage, insured property damage, maybe another billion or two in uninsured property damage, all because of an assumption, a narrative that what happened to George Floyd had to do with his race. Now, the thing was televised, remember? And the lead prosecutor was a black man, and he never once said that what happened to George Floyd had anything to do with his race. In fact, in his opening statement, he took pains to say the police in general were not on trial. The Minneapolis PD in general was not on trial. In fact, he praised them. He said this individual cop, Derek Chauvin, is on trial for what he did or didn't do to George Floyd. Yet all these people in the streets on the assumption that what happened to George Floyd had to do with his race. Now, I think if you were to ask most of the people, there were 200 cities that had protests, millions of people in the streets. I think if you were to ask most of these people to describe their political ideology, most of them would probably say that I'm either very liberal or liberal. There's a website called policemag.com. This is important. People who were self-described as very liberal were asked, how many unarmed black men did the police kill in 2019? One half of the self-described very liberal people, 50% of them, thought the police killed 1,000 unarmed black men in 2019. 8% thought they killed 10,000.
What?
Of those who were self-described as liberal, 39% thought they killed 1,000. 5% thought they killed 10,000. According to the Washington Post database, it was 12. That's the gap between what people think is going on versus what is going on. That's what happens to your mentality.
To be fair, not 12,000 or 1,200. 12.
12. Washington Post database. Mm-hmm. And in fact, the police kill more unarmed white people every year than they kill unarmed blacks. And there are video of the police.
So basically, they believe their own lies, right? This is now the definition, the difference between misinformation and disinformation, because these individuals start being misinformed, and from there they believe their own lies. After the process of believing their own lies, they get into a position where they start a disinformation via the government machinery. For an example, the issue of George Floyd. Even the South African president, Cyril Ramaphosa, is on record saying that George Floyd's murder has everything to do with systemic racism in America. And here is Larry Elder, 71 years old, a lawyer in America and also a radio broadcaster, stating categorically that it is not so. Wow, that is mind-blowing.
Mishandling, manhandling, mistreating unarmed white people, nobody cares. I urged people to Google Kelly Thomas, Fullerton, California, a few years ago. Literally, there's 3 or 4 cops beating up this homeless guy. 2 of them were tried, found not guilty. One had charges dismissed against him. Almost 9-10 minutes of video, almost as long as George Floyd. There's another one called Tony Timpa, T-I-M-P like Paul A, Dallas, Texas. Homeless guy, mentally ill. Cops beat him up. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. He said all that. Maybe 13 minutes of video. Dallas, Texas, white guy. Nobody cares. And my point is giving you the false impression that the police are killing unarmed black people when in fact it is rare for the police to kill anybody, let alone an unarmed black person. And by the way, unarmed does not mean not dangerous. Michael Brown was unarmed, but his DNA was found on the officer's gun. He had done a strong arm robbery just minutes earlier. So just because you're unarmed doesn't mean you're not perceived as dangerous. But it's rare for the police to kill anybody, let alone an unarmed black person. But the people in the street.
Wow, wow, wow. This should shock everybody who listens to the news, because basically it means the mainstream media is selling propaganda, government propaganda, which is disinformation, lying to the public. Because to be given an impression by a lawyer who is a black American who has been on the radio for more than 30 years, hosting his own show, that the statistics, according to the New York Times, do not categorically support such a view. That is problematic. Problematic in the sense that in our country, we have this notion through the party that is running this country, the African National Congress, which seeks to divide us by telling us about things that have happened donkeys years ago, apartheid. So even their very activities, they attribute them to apartheid. Their failure, rather, to act on anything, they attribute them to apartheid. It is no wonder that President Ramaphosa then has come out publicly supporting the strikes and condemning the death of George Floyd as being racist, because it's more about an ideology than the truth. Wow. Wow. Thank you very much, Larry. This is actually very informative.
As I said, from these numbers, have no blooming idea how infrequent this is.
The closest comparison I can make to it is the following, and I'm curious to get you.
I hope you guys got the fact that the police in America kill more white people. Firstly, the police, they seldom kill anybody in America. However, when they do, they kill more white people than they kill blacks. It's not the first time I'm hearing this. That is why I thought it necessary for me to play it here, because there are lots of race hustlers in America, like Al Sharpton, like the gentleman that was supported by Trump years ago, Dr. Reverend Jesse Jackson. Reverend Jesse Jackson, like Al Sharpton, is a race hustler. Like we have in our country, people like Mkutama, Julius Malema, all these people who believe that black people cannot be racist. But not only that, it is rather interesting that the African National Congress in its core does not have a policy as an organization that is anti-white. When you look at its policies, you will not find a policy. I'm not talking about government. Now I'm separating government from the African National Congress. You will not find a policy that is anti-white. However, if you go to government, you will find it, without a doubt. But I'm just talking about the organization now. Yet this organization that does not have a policy that is anti-white has leadership that has anti-white sentiments, like President Ramaphosa, who keeps on, and President Zuma, who keeps on the rhetoric of bringing apartheid for every failure of the ANC. The African National Congress has not managed to build a rainbow nation that Nelson Mandela had promised. Consequently, they keep on making reference to what has happened during apartheid, that this is happening because apartheid government, this apartheid government, that. Listen to President Ramaphosa's assertions during his imbizos, when he was in Tsomo, which is where my father was born and raised, and talking about the water infrastructure that they are intending to supply there, which for me is nothing but electioneering. He made mention how that the apartheid government had failed to provide water in Tsomo. Well, newsflash, Tsomo has not been under apartheid government for 50 solid years. Tsomo was liberated from what you call white rule when it became a TPVC state in 1976. I stand to be corrected about the exact dates, but you can check this out. It's easy to check it out. But the point is that by 1994, they had not been under white rule for at least, according to my initial calculation, by 1994 for about 18 years, right? Then from 1994 up until today, you've got another good 29 years. You can add that together, it's close to 47 years, it's almost 50 years. So there's been a black role in that region for that long, but yet you still hear people like President Ramaphosa telling you, rather telling the people in that area that the government of apartheid had failed to provide this benefit to the people. For me, that is disingenuous. And unfortunately, people buy into these lies. This is nothing but disinformation when it comes from the president. It's a propaganda, right? The same way the Democrats are selling racism, race hustling in America. Joe Biden said, for an example, if you don't vote for me, if you are not decided who you're going to vote for between myself and Trump, you are not black, right? And there was no outrage in the black community when this statement was made. And it's rather interesting that in South Africa, the same thing is being perpetuated by, in America, it's the Democrats. In South Africa, it's the African National Congress, a political party that presents itself as a non-racial party that believes in the same rights as the Democrats in America. I see a lot of parallels between the American Democrats and the South African National Congress. That is the ANC government. Even the way they are governing, even the rights that they allow, even their syllabuses in schools. It's a parallel that I would challenge many of you in South Africa to pay attention to, so that you get a deeper understanding of the route within which the African National Congress is taking this country. Okay, I'll leave it at that. But this was for me a very much eye-opener, coming from a black man in America who, as I said, is a lawyer and also a radio host who has been having a radio show for 30 years plus, and he's 71 years old, and he makes these assertions that there is no systematic racism in America. Okay, he is not denying that there was systematic racism once upon a time, but he's saying today that is not the case, and he's clearly saying that cops in America, by reason of percentages, if you listen to this entire video, which I did, and even in this short clip that I've played for you, he makes mention that the police seldom kill anybody in America, but when they do, they kill more whites than they do black people. Even when he talks about crime, black people commit more crime than white people in America. This is rather remarkable, because when you come back to our scenario in South Africa, you see that there is a lot of lawlessness that the African National Congress is not focusing on, right? And black people in America seem to be wanting to, I'm talking about now black people who are race hustlers like the L. Sharptons and all that, they will not focus on the real issues, the fatherlessness, the absence of the father at home, as a main contributing factor towards the high numbers of incarceration of black people in America. And you look at South Africa, which has the third highest crime rate in the world in terms of murder, in terms of rape, and then you ask yourself whether or not, isn't there a parallel there? I would love to know from, for example, Statistician General, what is the how many people are incarcerated in South Africa who come from a home that has a mother and a father? Because I'm pretty sure that these parallels will give us a good root cause, or at least an indication as to how to get to the bottom of resolving our own crime problem, which we have. Because it seems to me that the crime problem that we have can be resolved when government is focusing on, one, ensuring that they do not promote the fatherlessness at homes by getting women to marry government and encouraging pregnancies outside wedlock, and then which result in children being raised only by their mothers, and they support them with these 350 and all these grants that are being given for children to bear children, you see, because children that have been raised by other children without a father at home, they are so many times more likely to commit a crime and to end up in prison. This is documented in America, but I would love to know how, if there's any statistics in our country that would what to call it, give us a clear indication as to perhaps how many, for example, children have been born outside wedlock, percentage-wise in South Africa. How many of those have been incarcerated? And if we're looking into our prison, how many of our prisoners, I'm talking about South Africans, are coming from fatherless homes? I think that would give us a very good starting point in terms of root cause analysis to try to get to the point as to how do we curb such high rape statistics, such high murder statistics. I mean, we are the third murder capital of the world. Can you imagine that? A country that is not in war? Wow. An African country that is not in war. And many people, particularly in South Africa, when they talk and I hear political analysts, they always associate this with the inequality between the rich and the poor. I suspect strongly that that is a wild goose chase based on my own research and what I've listened to and the parallels that I see between South Africa and America. That's the point for me bringing up this video, that I have observed over a process of time that we have a lot in common with Black America. We are probably a good 16 million more than they are in terms of number. We are a country, they are not, but in terms of numbers, they are more or less very close to us. There are about 44 million Black Americans. We have got about 60 million Blacks in South Africa. Well, you include whites, potentially more or less if you take out the what we call the Afrikaner and the English, and well, you don't have to take out Indians, but if you take out Indians, perhaps the 1.5% of Indians and the 10%, 8 to 10% of Afrikaners and English, you're probably going to end up with a 40-something million of black people, which more or less means there's the same roundabout number in America of blacks than the blacks that stays in South Africa. And there's a lot of commonalities in terms of incarceration, in terms of lawlessness, lawless behavior, in terms of victim mentality, in terms of being recipients of the welfare. There's a lot of similarities here. For me, it's uncanny the way there's so many similarities. Okay, nevertheless, I'd like to leave the video at that because obviously I have a lot of work to do to research and get to the bottom of the statistics on our side. But it is rather interesting to know this from America, that it is indeed not so that there is systemic racism. For an example, in South Africa, the very reason why they hide behind the apartheid, they are creating an impression that there is systemic racism. If there is systemic racism when the president is black and the political party that is in power is black and all the ministers are black, lawmakers are black, then I'm not quite sure if they understand what do we mean about systemic racism. Because it can be racism when black people are the ones who are not delivering services required by black people. It can be racism. It has to be something else. Because for me, it's not about race in South Africa. It's more about, unless you are saying it's a racism perpetuated by ANC against white people. But white people in South Africa are not necessarily poor. They are not suffering from poverty. They are not in the high numbers of people that are being buried every weekend. Yes, they do die. They are affected by the crime rates as well. And certainly they are affected by the racism that comes from the policies of the current government, without a doubt. But still, the poor, the masses of the poor in South Africa are blacks. the recipients of injustice in South Africa are blacks, even when it comes to access to justice, when it comes to access to the courts, and so on and so forth, the rapes, the murders, and so on and so forth. Okay, let me leave the video at that. You'll tell me what you think about what I've just given you, but I'll obviously build on this one. I have to do a follow-up, get these statistics from Statistics South Africa, and then I'll give it to you in a much more packaged way. Okay, ciao, ciao, bye.